You walk into a grocery store intending to pick up only a few things. No one argues with you, nothing goes wrong. Yet by the time you reach the parking lot, you feel strangely exhausted. Your mind has been quietly carrying far more than your body. If this happens often, you've probably been told you are overthinking, that you are too emotional or too fragile. For a very long time, culture assumed that these differences in how we react to the exact same environment were simply matters of personality. Neuroscience paints a much different picture. Every second, millions of data points flood your senses. If your brain consciously processed every sound, color, and physical sensation all at once, daily life would cause total systemic paralysis. To prevent this, the brain deploys a highly efficient filtering mechanism. It constantly edits reality. It decides what deserves attention, what might be dangerous, and what safely fades into the background. Most of the time, we never notice this editing. We simply assume the world we experience is the objective world. Two people can sit in the exact same room and leave with completely different memories. Human beings do not simply hold different opinions about a shared environment. Our nervous systems dictate how much data we receive, forcing us to inhabit entirely different realities. In the 1990s, psychologists identified a recurring pattern among healthy individuals who processed their surroundings with unusual depth. They called this naturally occurring biological temperament sensory processing sensitivity. It is not a mental illness. It is not a disorder to be cured. The core mechanical difference lies in the initial filter. While an average nervous system rapidly discards the majority of incoming stimuli, a highly sensitive nervous system allows a massive amount of information to pass deep into the processing center before deciding what matters. Taking in this much raw data requires an immense amount of energy. Imagine spending the day placing small stones into a backpack. Every conversation adds a stone. Every fluorescent light adds another. Every social shift adds weight. By evening, the nervous system faces deep mental fatigue. This heavy informational load is consistently mislabeled as emotional weakness. The exact mechanism that causes this exhaustion also produces profound observation. It allows a person to notice the slight hesitation before someone answers a question, the shifting emotional atmosphere of a room, the complex layers within a piece of music that most listeners blindly bypass. Feeling overwhelmed by a crowded space or an intense conversation is not a failure of resilience. It is the mathematical cost of a nervous system tasked with processing a much richer, denser signal. If taking in this volume of data leads to such rapid exhaustion, we have to ask why human beings develop this trait at all. Is this high-resolution processing an inherited characteristic, or is it a reaction to the environment? The answer is both. Innate sensitivity is a naturally occurring biological baseline. These individuals are born with a nervous system designed from day one to perceive the world with profound depth and subtlety. Learned sensitivity develops through survival. A child growing up in an emotionally unpredictable environment cannot control their surroundings, so they begin studying them. They memorize subtle shifts in a parent's mood, footsteps, and size. Their nervous system develops severe hypervigilance to predict danger. These two origins look remarkably similar from the outside, creating a dangerous confusion. Many adults carry a deeply adapted, hyper-aroused nervous system and assume it is an unchangeable personality trait. They confuse who they needed to become to survive with who they actually are. Untangling these two threads requires absolute honesty. The sensitivity you are born with requires acceptance. The hypervigilance you learn to stay safe requires compassion and eventually release. To understand why nature would preserve such an exhausting baseline trait, we must look at human biodiversity. An old-growth forest survives because it contains hundreds of different organisms performing different roles. Resilient ecosystems rely entirely on diverse survival strategies, never on uniformity. For much of human history, a community composed only of bold risk-takers might discover new resources, but it would completely overlook hidden threats. Cautious observers provide the necessary counterbalance. They detect the subtle environmental shifts, the faint smell of smoke, and the emotional tensions that precede conflict. This capacity for deep observation shapes how we interact with reality. The psychologist Carl Jung recognized that human life is driven by symbols and forces beneath our conscious awareness. The sensitive mind naturally bypasses surface-level explanations to look for these deeper, archetypal patterns. The philosopher Alan Watts argued against the modern assumption that human beings are isolated entities. A deeply permeable nervous system inherently feels this truth, processing life as a unified, continuous event, rather than a series of disconnected objects. Thich Nhat Hanh called this interbeing. When someone processes their environment deeply enough, the invisible relationships tying a cloud to the rain and the rain to the tree become obvious. Marine biologist Rachel Carson understood that collecting data was useless without sustained wonder. Highly sensitive individuals provide the bridge between cold scientific observation and a living relationship with the natural world. Highly sensitive people are not fragile anomalies. They are a biological necessity. They are the exact mechanism a species relies upon to process complex information, retain a sense of wonder, and protect the community from what everyone else has missed. Possessing a nervous system that receives high-resolution data is morally neutral. It does not automatically make someone compassionate or mature. Sensitivity is simply information. Wisdom is what a person decides to do with it. Without boundaries, this volume of information becomes a trap. The sensitive person walks into a room, notices another person's anxiety, and physically absorbs it. Observing someone else's emotional state turns into carrying their pain. This lack of discernment degrades into chronic people-pleasing. It creates emotional fusion, where the nervous system is so practiced at managing the moods of others that it loses track of its own baseline. Healing requires a rigorous separation of observation from absorption. A sensitive person must constantly ask their own nervous system, is this emotion actually mine? You can recognize suffering without making it your identity. Without this specific boundary, the profound gift of deep empathy inevitably collapses into the total exhaustion of self-abandonment. The modern world insists that psychological maturity requires developing thicker skin. We are told to become less affected, to ignore the subtleties, and to detach from the suffering around us. True stability looks entirely different. It requires growing deeper roots. It means cultivating a nervous system regulated enough to witness profound beauty and sorrow without being destroyed by the current. To achieve this, sensitive individuals must actively identify the conditions where they thrive. They must regularly retreat to quiet environments, forests, mountains, or solitude, places that do not demand a constant performance or a continuous threat assessment. The ultimate maturation of a sensitive person is not numbness. It is the ability to remain entirely permeable and open to the richness of life, while maintaining absolute psychological stability. Your sensitivity was never a flaw to be fixed. It is a biological language waiting to be understood. When you give it boundaries, it ceases to be a burden and becomes a conscious, rooted way of belonging to this extraordinary living world. If you enjoyed this exploration, subscribe to our Human Atlas, because understanding the quiet truths within ourselves is how we learn to stop abandoning each other and find our truest place within the larger living world.